When you have it all in front of you laid out so clearly. And what's really amazing, so the work of the legislature, I run the agency of the legislature that really advises on these issues. And my first job was to be the attorney for the Commission on Children at the legislature. So it was then that we were doing this work, sort of alerting, teaching legislators, teaching policymakers, people who make decisions about resourcing and resources across the state. Firstly, about the science of reading, why it works. And secondly, what we weren't doing in our classrooms. And it was tough. It wasn't easy. We had all the science, we had all the information in front of us, but it wasn't easy for a few reasons. One, Lucy Calkins, who was referenced in the film, and the whole language approach is right down the street, effectively, in New York, right? So there are a lot of educators who were taught in the old way, or in that way, of teaching literacy. Another dynamic in Connecticut is that we have very high-achieving districts. But as you heard in the film, a lot of those costs, a lot of those approaches, a lot of those interventions that people with resources can make available to their children are not available to all families in Connecticut. And that's why you see the opportunity gaps that you see in Connecticut. We are among the highest rated school districts and kids in the country, and yet our opportunity and achievement gap is wider than in most places in the country. So it wasn't easy. So questions came. Oh, but wait a second, isn't it the teachers? Shouldn't we have better teachers? Hold them accountable. Well, they don't know what they don't know, so they don't have the resources. Well, isn't it the school leaders? Should we blame them? Right? Well, I don't know. I mean, they have what they have at their disposal. We kept asking, well, isn't it this, isn't it that? The last thing we were asking was, well, wait a second, what's actually happening in schools, and how do we turn the tide on what teachers, leaders, and kids have access to in our schools? That took a lot of hard work. The final question that was asked was the most telling. After we had all the science, after we understood the lack of access, we understood that there was an achievement and opportunity gap, the final question that was asked was, well, isn't it too expensive? So you can imagine, from the position where we sit, where we're talking about this generation after generation of children, every single year is another generation of students that is slipping through our fingers, entering that school to prison pipeline because they can't read. And you ask those families, how much is too much when it comes to giving them the opportunity, the leg up to survive in this society? So it's not too expensive, but of course Connecticut does things in very interesting ways. I'll tell you something about Norwalk, which we've always been proud of. Norwalk was an early adopter of the science of reading, even before the state knew what it was doing. Several of the schools here in Norwalk were part of early pilot programs that were funded through philanthropy and others. And Norwalk was one of the examples that we gave about how this work could actually make a difference. The problem isn't resolve. Resolve is the first step, political will they call it. The real problem is resourcing. And resources came out at first. 5 schools were chosen. The cost was going to be in the millions and millions of dollars, still to a little bit compared to a lifetime of success that our kids weren't accessing. So they said, you know what, let's do a pilot. Let's start with 5 schools and see what happens. And sure enough, kids are doing better. Teachers are saying, I never knew. I can't believe so many kids came through my district and I didn't teach them to read. Parents were saying, this is amazing. My kid is reading, right? So what I love about this is, fast forward now, in the past couple of years, we have really ramped up our efforts in the state of Connecticut. We have made it so that all of our reading, access to reading instruction is science and research based in the state of Connecticut. If it isn't in your district, then you're going to receive the resourcing and the technical assistance from the new Center for Literacy Research and Reading Success at the State Department of Education. So the only thing that we have now, we have political will, we have the resources in place, right? The people in place who know what we are requiring, but we do need more resources because what happens is that in our districts, the triangle, right, where most of us are doing great, a few of us need a little help, and just very few of us actually need high-level interventions, is turned upside down on its head. That means a lot of our kids need interventions, and time is taken. So with that, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a sort of the agita that we experienced. We talked about a sense of urgency. The sense of urgency is very palpable because for every family, that's 100% of their reality as a kid. It might be, 2% of kids in the state of Connecticut can't read, 3%, 35% can't read. But for that family, it's 100% of their future. And that's why they have that sense of urgency. So thank you so much, and I know that we're going to have a panel discussion, so thank you.
Thank you for bringing forward our perspective. I'd like to welcome now our panelists to come forward, and our moderator.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good to see you. I'm Dia Bryant. I have the pleasure of moderating this wonderful panel. For how many of you is this the first time you saw this film? Wow. Profound, right? Incredibly powerful. I should tell you a little bit about myself. I say that I worked from the classroom to the Capitol because I once was a classroom teacher. I taught math. Founded a school about 10 years ago, led that school. And now I lead a research policy and advocacy organization in the state of New York where we have fought for policies to address the literacy crisis in our state. And so you may have seen New York City make a big announcement 6 or 7 months ago about moving toward evidence-based literacy practices, and that was the work of our team and the advocacy that we do. So I'm excited to be with you. Very, very topic, and we have an esteemed panel with us tonight of some pretty important folks that have really important jobs and happen to know quite a bit about literacy. So I'm excited to hear from them. And we're going to kind of go up and down the line. Let's just start with who you are, what you do, and sort of how are you acting in your own role in space to combat the crisis that we were made aware of in this film.
Start. Is this working?
Yeah, turn it on, girl. There you go.
Yeah, working Hi, Jennifer Barahona. I'm the CEO of Norwalk Acts, which is a collective impact partnership here in the city of Norwalk that really reaches across all sectors that touch children and families, from education, housing, healthcare, community, civic, government, to really solve problems collaboratively, because we know no one single sector is responsible for this. It doesn't fall on the K-12 system exclusively, that this happens much earlier, and I'm happy once we get going to talk a little bit more specifically about the work we're doing in early childhood to combat this.
Hi, this is Anna Holzenbeck, Executive Director of Read to Grow. Read to Grow has been in existence for 23 years. We're known for giving every baby born in 14 hospitals their first book. So if you've had a baby and a kid in the last 23 years, hopefully you got a book from us. Welcome to the World is a book you currently get. And we actually took a step back and started prenatally because we know that the habits of reading and talking and singing and rhyming and bonding with your child begin even before baby is born. So we're currently working with 9 community health clinics around the state, 12 sites. We give books out in 14 different languages, and we encourage families to be their child's first and most important teacher. And there's lots of other things you do. If you have a child with you, or even if you have a child at home, on your way out, we have 2 team members in the back. I'm just going to make a shout out our bookmobile this year. So when you leave the theater, if you turn right, you'll see our big purple bookmobile. Feel free to make a stop and grab a book for the child in your life. Thank you.
I love that. I have my kids at home, so I'll be grabbing some books as well. I'm Dr. Jeanette Moore. I'm a graduate of Norwalk Public Schools. I work in City Hall, and I also work at Norwalk High School in P-Tech. I teach reading. I do everything literacy. from the moment I graduated from Norwalk High School. So I have a 24-year career teaching kids how to read. I also work at Western Connecticut State as a special education professor. So I'm very dedicated to reading. We've been doing science reading in Norwalk for several years. This is an implementation. We know phonological awareness works, and many of our teachers are educated, our educators are educated in science reading. So it's great to be here this evening with you.
Hi, I'm Tabitha Sarah. I'm the superintendent in Stamford Public Schools, and I have about 17,000 students, so children of my own. Can I take 17,000 so we I appreciate being here this evening. I started my career as an elementary teacher, so reading has always been near and dear to my heart, and so I'm so happy that we are joining each other on these panels because they were on my panel in Stanford, and I think that every time that you see the movie, you learn something more. But what I learned most is the parent is the first teacher, and if we can really change what we do first to 5, it's going to make all the difference in the world when they step into our classroom. So just excited to be here and have this conversation.
Hi, I'm Michael Tassani, Superintendent in Fairfield. Prior to 1 year ago today, I was a superintendent in Bridgeport, my hometown, where I worked for 23 and a half years. I also worked 4 years here at West Rocks Middle School in Norwalk earlier in my career. I'm happy to be here. We are in the process and probably one of the few suburban Fairfield County districts that is shifting from the balanced literacy Lucy Calkins model to the science of reading, and we're in that transition period this year through a revamping and rewriting of our curriculum, also embedding resources that support the science of reading. So we're happy for that work in Fairfield.
Thank you, that's great to hear. Steve Hernandez, I'm an attorney at the Connecticut General Assembly at the legislature, and we're really fortunate to have come so far when it comes to state leaders on both sides of the aisle who really support this work. We have one of them here, Dominique Johnson, and there are others as well, Bob Dove. Just really strong support, but this started with the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus many years ago. That sense of urgency that we described, because these are our kids, black and brown kids, so great to be here.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Alexandra Estrella, Superintendent, proud Superintendent of Norwalk Public Schools. The context that I bring is, one, the importance of our village, making sure that all the members of our community are coming together to do this important work, particularly when we have over 8.4 million Americans that don't know how to read and are illiterate in our country. And coupling that with the disparity that currently exists for black and brown children, we really have to see the importance and urgency of the work that we need to do so that when we talk about serving all children, we mean all.
Good evening. My name is Greg Burnett. I personally serve on the Common Council. This is my 6th term on the Common Council, currently the Council President. Prior to coming onto the Council, I was elected to the Board of Education. And from early on, I'm a beyond believer that education is the greatest equalizer. And I didn't make that up. We all know that came from Martin Luther King. But reading is the foundation. And it's the foundation not only to be effective and to function, but to create opportunities to exceed. Because understanding the very basics of reading, it allows you then to move into other aspects, such as being able to be technology literate and to understand how to do research. And so I'm talking beyond the fundamentals, and I think what we're doing here in Norwalk is creating the platform so that our students could go on to do much greater things. But if they don't have the found platform, there's going to be some struggles. And we want to eliminate any obstacles that might exist.
Thank you for sharing that. I will say that in my work nationally, I often point to Connecticut for its efforts, and specifically around the Right to Read Act and the literacy work that is happening at the state level that will deploy coaches into schools. That is definitely something to be applauded nationally. And you are a model for us as a nation, for sure. I want to kick it off with Greg, since you still have the microphone. Is this the first time you saw the film?
I'm sorry.
Is this the first time you saw the film?
First time you saw the film?
Yes, this is the first time I saw the film. But I was aware of the film when I believe it was viewed in Stamford. Unfortunately, I was not available to attend, so yes, this is the first time I saw it.
Can you just share a couple of just your initial reactions?
Well, the key takeaway for me was, the fact that the teacher that was able to really make a difference, she had to, as a term that was used in the film, she had to operate under the radar. And that stuck with me because it's like, do we allow within our educational system the flexibility for teachers if they see something that works? Do we give them the flexibility? Do we empower them to try something different because they see it might work? And not be so rigid to say, you have to go this way. You have to go A, B, C. But she saw that you can go A and maybe jump to C, and it might work. And her results showed that she was successful. So that really stuck with me that, we have to increase the dialogue with our teachers to understand what really works for the students in that classroom and give them the flexibility to be empowered to be the best advocates for those students to make them succeed.
It's a really great point, and I think a lot of that has to do with resources, how we choose tools, how we choose the resources that actually land inside schools, inside our local education agencies, and with superintendents. So I'd love to hear from our three superintendents who are here a little bit of a response to what Greg offers us.
So I think coming into the district, one of the things that I focused over, that I started to do was listening and observing. And in that process, one of the things that was very evident to me was that we had expertise within the district that had all the components of research-based tools around the science of reading that were yielding very positive outcomes, particularly for students that were struggling in learning how to read or had exhibited some learning need, particularly dyslexia, and supporting those students in learning how to read. Yet, we really didn't have the structures in place to really support students in the classroom to learn to read. And as we know, not all students, not necessarily they might not have a disability, they don't learn how to read with a balanced literacy model or some models like reading. And unfortunately, a lot of our educators were trained in that way. So for us, it was really important to take a lot of the learnings from the Literacy Center, bring them into the classroom to really build capacity. So we started training our staff with letters, which is a tool or a program that teaches educators how to teach science within the science of reading. That then allowed us also to think further about what are the supports that we need in the system to effectively support our staff. And we looked at reading interventionists as well as coaches to really facilitate the learning process within the schools. We advocated with our legislators to help us fund these resources, and we were able to get the resources we needed to do that work. While we also understood that there was a need to also train these experts further so that they effectively knew how to support teachers in implementing the science of reading. And the process has been slow but steady. We have been building capacity within the district in training staff around the science of reading. And our goal is that 5 receive the training so that all of our educators are able to effectively support students and the development of learning practices.
That's really wonderful. Really good. Should be applauded. Really good. We'll hear about Fairfield and then Stamford.
Yeah, so when I first got to Fairfield, on the surface, I think, it was resounding when the gentleman mentioned, look at the data. And the data looks on the surface to be okay. 70% of the kids are achieving on high stakes testing. But when you start to look behind the data and you start to dig a little deeper, it's exactly as he described. You have parents and you start to ask questions who start to provide you with insight on what they're doing behind the scenes to support their child in order to get to that 70% number. So many of the parents expressed a lot of frustration because they were investing a lot of hard-earned money into programs like Kumon and other tutoring programs in town that were making a lot of money. I did a little research. You had these 2 Kumon sites that were open for a total of 11 hours a week, not on weekends, and they were operating in commercial buildings that the rents had to be high. So they were making a lot of money, and actually one of them is owned by 2 retired Norwalk Public School teachers. Interesting enough. So looking at the data, we saw that it was flat, and that there were subgroups of kids, black and brown kids, special education students, that were not achieving. The gap within the district was large. So knowing where I came from and the urgency, and we have to provide opportunities for these kids. So we are working, we're presenting the new curriculum on November 14th to the board. But a lot of the things that gentleman mentioned were things that I had to present, things that I had to overcome because parents are leery. They think that implementing a new approach is going to, what I've heard over and over, it's going to ruin the joy of reading for kids.
Yeah.
But my argument to them is, what about the kids that can't access reading? What kind of joy are they experiencing?
Oh, that's real.
And that's, 30% right now, and that number is going to continue to grow because the numbers have indicated over time that we are struggling in meeting the needs of kids.
Excellent point. We heard tools. We heard data. Let's go to Stamford.
So when I arrived in Stamford Public Schools, 80% of our students were in some intervention program. So you think about the triangle, right? And it's supposed to be 80% are in the core, and 15% get intervention, and then 5% we need maybe to go a little higher. And it was an inverted triangle, right? And so we needed to figure out what was going on. So we decided that we were going to partner with Literacy Hub, who is experts in teaching the science of reading. And that just wasn't good enough for us. We thought we could have people come in and start to support us, but we need to do some work with our own building administrators. And so we started to read some books together about the science of reading. And we realized some of the programs, which we had over 100 different programs that were being used across our school district, that we needed to figure out what was working and what wasn't working. And so we quickly realized that if we didn't start to have someone going into classrooms every day and coaching our teachers, because the biggest issue is when you think about people who are graduating from a higher university, how many classes do you think you get in reading in undergrad if you're going to teach early grade reading? Across the country, it's 1 or 2. And so if you think that teachers are coming in feeling confident that they can teach a child how to read, especially when that child is struggling, it's not a fair position to put them in. And I'll tell you where it gets frustrating, and you heard each of us talk about it, that most of these programs, we knew what we needed to do 4, 5, 6 years ago, but what did we have to do? Pilot programs. Why? Because we couldn't afford it. And that's just not acceptable. We need to be able to have the resources we need to put in front of our teachers the resources that they need to be able to teach their children and teach their children well. and provide them with additional professional development. So that's the work we're doing in Stamford now. We are adopting a new reading program. It started in 5 of our schools, and now will go from kindergarten to 5th grade over the next 3 years. We believe it's the right work to do, but it's not just giving the resources. We need to help teachers understand and help teachers understand continuously how to get better at teaching reading, and to support them in doing that and not play the blame game, because the blame game is not getting us anywhere. So really excited to be doing this work. It's really complicated work, but until we get the continuous funding we need to be able to make sure that everything doesn't have to start as a pilot program, we are just going to continue to lag behind.
Fantastic reflection. Thank you for that. A couple of notes on what she shared. The National Center for Teacher Quality released a report about a month and a half ago that is actually a letter grade, remember those when we were kids, right? An actual letter grade on each teacher prep program in the science of reading. So if you have a moment, just Google NCTQ, Science of Reading in universities, and you'll be able to see what universities in Connecticut look like in terms of letter grades around whether or not there is science of reading actually infused into the curriculum that your teachers are taking. Really powerful data that they produced. I think we should also hear very clearly that you can't do this alone. And so Jennifer sort of kicked us off with like, we're a collective impact organization. It really does take outside partners to get a lot of this work done, because there are things that can be done on the outside in terms of organizing and advocacy that actually help our superintendents and our policymakers get things done. Right? And so Jen, I'd love to hear a little bit about what your organization is doing to actually create that momentum, and would love to also hear in the 0 to 3, 0 to 5 space, how you're thinking about pre-literacy in there.
Well, this is exciting because just last week we were with Representative Johnson, who's here, and the Office of Early Childhood Commissioner, Beth Bai, talking about the importance of early literacy. You know, my undergraduate degree is in child development, and we know that 75% of children's brains are wired by the age of 3. So we are not waiting until kindergarten to have these conversations and talk about literacy. And so as a community, we came together to collectively work on early childhood and come together about 10 years ago and decided if we can get children and all early care and education providers and parents in the community to be understanding the 5 developmental domains of early childhood, and the first one of those is communication. And so it's not necessarily intuitive. I happen to have a degree in this, but if you're a parent who, like Teresa in the film, was saying, well, now we're putting the noodles in the water and now we're doing this, those are the kinds of things that the ages and stages developmental kind of screener and support provides for parents. There's 21 points between 2 months of age and 60 months of age, where parents can fill out an assessment and understand and track and see if their children are where they should be at each of those 21 points. And what we've done then is worked with all the early care and education providers and put community advocates out into parents who are from diverse neighborhoods in Norwalk, who speak languages like Haitian Creole and Spanish, to work parent to parent to say, I know it's not easy, but here's an activity you can do with your 18-month-old that helps with literacy, even if that parent struggles with literacy. That came up last week in our conversation. If you have a parent who's illiterate, how do you help them work with their children? There's plenty of things you can do, even if you can't read a book yourself, to promote language. So we've really taken a collaborative approach. We have a lot of great strengths in the city. I'm looking at Mary Oster, and credit to the mayor and the city for having an early childhood position within the city government that's very unique to Norwalk. And because of the work that we've done, helping prepare kids developmentally for kindergarten and a 10 percentage point increase over the time we've been doing this, we are now, Norwalk is an exemplar in the state of Connecticut and increasingly nationally about the early childhood development work we've been doing. And with great partners like Read to Grow, getting books into the hands of young people.
Thank you, Jennifer. I want to pause and say that I'm a parent of young children, and I'm a highly educated person. I have a lot of privilege in my life. I have a master's degree in teaching secondary English. And I have a 7-year-old who struggles with reading. And I run a literacy organization. Right? It's a real thing. It's a real challenge. And something that struck me about that film, somebody said earlier, every time you see it, you sort of learn something new. What really stuck with me tonight is the families that have to work 3 jobs, and they're still getting up and helping their child figure out what letter goes first and what letter goes next, right? I think what has kept me at Read to Grow through the pandemic, through being a mom of young children working full-time, is the belief that all families want what's best for their child. And we say families at Read to Grow. We've actually moved away from saying parents because families look different everywhere, and there are lots of different adults in a child's life who are involved in helping them. It's that village, right, that you mentioned. There are a lot of different adults who are involved in raising children and loving them and making sure that they have a strong foundation. And so for Read to Grow, we start with that assumption that all families want what's best for their child, and we start with the belief that families are their child's first and most important teacher. So that's the foundation, and then from there, we can build that messaging. We can come forward with support for families in a way that's not, you need to do this, or you're doing something wrong. Right? It's inviting folks into the conversation, being a partner in their child's learning, creating joyful opportunities for storytelling to happen, for rhyming to happen, for the conversations that you saw on screen. I think the most laughter and chuckling I heard in the audience was when Ivy was being amazingly adorable, right? All of those precious, beautiful interactions between young children and their caregivers who love them so much. The books are almost sort of besides the point, right? They're a tool for that strong foundation, because the other message that Read to Grow has given over time is around screen time. We see a lot of screens being used as a strategy. It's certainly important, right? And it's a tool for learning. COVID made that abundantly clear, and we've gotten a lot better at knowing how and when to use screens, but there are also times when screens aren't appropriate, right? It's better to put a book in front of a child than a screen at times, right? It's the American Academy of Pediatrics. Up until 2, limiting screen time so that you have that engagement, right? A child who is sitting on a caregiver's lap, when they do those brain studies, the white matter that's developed when the child is sitting on the lap of the caregiver, sharing a story, the brain matter, the white matter that's developed, that's the connection between all those neurons, right? That is far more developed when you have a caregiver who's sharing a story rather than putting a child in front of a screen. So I'm not anti-screens, but that is a message that we are also trying to support families in, recognizing we are in a new age of screens being necessary and part of a child's life. But when you have the opportunity to put that book instead of the screen, magical things can happen.
I really appreciate what both of you shared, because you both, in a way, highlight what Kareem was delivering, which was sort of this gap between what we understand to be theory and then what happens in our practice. And many of us kind of talk about what happens, but none of us are actually inside the 4 walls of a classroom, right? We observe teachers, we look at data. I want to hear from Jeanette some of the things that Norwalk Public Schools is doing to actually impact classroom practice and change the way students are learning. And then perhaps we'll go to Stephen, if that's okay. And you can tell us a little bit about some of the policy conditions that make that possible and what you see in the future in terms of policy that will allow them to continue to expand.
So my role is really threefold. So I evaluate and I'll consult with teachers, I'll evaluate students, but I also teach in the classroom. Because I believe that regardless of the amount of evaluations or consultations that are needed, I need to really be on the ground in order to understand what's going on with our students and what our best practices in live time. Norwalk Public Schools is employing a variety of science and reading-based programs. as Dr. Estrella mentioned, we have letters, which is written by an Orton Gillingham Fellow from the Academy. I'm an associate of the Academy. We've studied since 1932. It's what works. And we also have Spire, also written by a fellow from the Academy. We have Sound Sensible. We have a multitude of programs that are permeating all of the schools, including NECC for early childhood, so that all of our teachers can experience the science of reading and can be trained and utilize the tools and resources. We have a wealth of SRBI interventions. We also have our students in special education who are receiving interventions. So this dual role, or however many hats I wear, is very rich because I'm always in the trenches with our teachers, so that when I come to them, I'm also their confidant in terms of what they need help with, and I'm not telling them per se what to do. I'm working by their side, and I'm helping them triage, because every child has a different reading fingerprint. Although we're looking to solidify the reading loop, using the same areas of the brain that were mentioned in our presentation, which makes this a science of reading. It's a neurobiological process. All of our teachers are really learning with us, and it's nice to be their confidant in the classroom. They're always welcome to come to my classroom. It's a living model. I'll even have Zooms or Teams, so facing my class so they can see me demonstrating something, perhaps from Linda Newbell, visualizing, verbalizing. They're seeing it in real time and listening to student responses. So it's almost like a lab for the science of reading, and it's important that there's a duality so that the teachers feel comfortable. And I triage, so you might see me flying around town, sorry if I'm there's books, there's all kinds of things all over the floor of my car, but it's because sometimes I'll end up going to the school because a particular teacher has a very specific question that a Zoom or a Teams or a quick meeting won't do justice. I need to go and model, or I need to bring resources directly, because every classroom has its own fingerprint and demographic. All of our children are reading at different rates, but they all have exposure to a variety of science of reading tools.
That's beautiful. And just so you know, I don't know one educator with a clean car. Myself included. Parents, go to Steve.
Well, thank you so much. One of the things that's really clear to us now, this notion of plausible deniability. If you don't know something, you can't hold it against you, right? Well, we know now. We know what the science of reading is. We know how it works. And now we have to hold ourselves accountable to it. And from my vantage point, which is the vantage point of the legislature, I call the legislature the investor. Mm-hmm. And the return on that investment is family and community economic success, and then the success of the individual as well. So many of our systems were built on scarcity model and scarcity mentality. There was just enough to go around, so it's okay that not everybody's doing all right. Right, but now we understand that each one of us is the asset. Each one of us is the investable asset. So this scarcity mentality, there's only just enough to go around, or the way things are, is exactly what we should buck. There was this great message on the screen where they said, when you go to your school, ask, do you use the science of reading? And if so, what are you doing? Well, when you go to your legislature, have you supported the science of reading, and how are you funding it? Is what you need to ask your legislator. Hold each of them accountable. I wish I could tell you this was a partisan thing, that there are people on both sides of the aisle who have been champions for literacy, and people on both sides of the aisle would say, well, it's too expensive. So it's not partisan. So each one of us can hold our legislatures accountable.
I really appreciate that last part that you said, Stephen, because again, it elevates something that Kareem shared. After the Civil War, during Reconstruction, we saw the emergence of anti-literacy laws in the South. And what we know about policy and legislation is that even when they go away, there are remnants of them in our systems, in the way we behave, in our practices. And it is almost wild to think that it is 2023, a year that many men and women during Reconstruction probably never imagined. and we are talking about people who cannot read. Real life humans. Our technology has advanced. We have artificial intelligence that is powering everything from our phones to our vehicles. And we have children that cannot read. We have work to do. And I hope that, if anything, this film stirs you up enough to make you want to do something. And if it didn't, on the way home, you can open your Spotify or Apple Music, whatever it is that you use, and just listen to the first episode of Soul Story. And about 5 minutes in, you'll be so incensed that you'll likely just start a reading movement yourself, because that's essentially what I did after hearing Emily talk. Enough was enough. It just didn't make sense. So I'd love to hear from the panel. We can go with the popcorn around, and this will be sort of our wrap up. As Stephen mentioned, you know, once you know, you can't unknow. He didn't say it like that, but that's what he meant, right?
I'm just so glad you mentioned Full the Story, because I remember some of my staff is in the back, and I stopped. I was walking my dog when I finished the last episode of Full the Story, and I was like, if there's one thing we can do in Norwalk, it is to get every kid reading on grade level at third grade. And so I think a call to action to everybody is, you know, there's great programs through NEF to mentor, to be a reading buddy. Personally, tomorrow morning, Dr. Estrella and I have breakfast on the calendar, so we'll talk about, you know, what we can do collaboratively to kind of continue linking the data that is showing that if we do a really good job in early childhood, the third grade reading scores are improving. So how can we just continue to create more momentum there?
Well, I would say the question that you mentioned in terms of call to action, it's not really a new call to action. I would say it's a continuous call to action in this administration and serving on the council. Education is at the forefront of what we think about, because we know the true value of making a difference in the lives of the students here in Norwalk. You use a term, return on investment, and that term was used once before, and it wasn't perceived to be the best way of communicating how our funding and the results of the funding that we provide. But I would say that when we look at the budget process, it's not a new call to action in terms of what are the things that we can do to ensure we provide the necessary funding for our school system, not to remain consistent, but to exceed. But we have to balance that with other challenges, because there's other services across the entire city. But I will say, in all honesty, education is at the forefront of what we think about when we talk about the investment, because we know the return has such value that it's hard to quantify, because we know students will go on to do such amazing things, but they have to have the resources and the support to achieve.
I think my call to action is not allowing the system to get in the way forward. Change is hard, change is difficult, and trying to reshape the thinking of the adults in the system is hard. Particularly because people like what they know and usually want to reject what is different and what they don't know. So the process of engaging our community in building their capacity on the science of reading is, for me, important to keep the eye on the prize and not allow the resistance to get in the way. I always say this, I think I say this when we're engaging in the budget season and throughout the scope of the work, that a community's biggest investment is their children, because they will be the future that will And in order for us to do that, there's no better way than ensuring that our students are educated citizens that can make informed decisions for the benefit of the community. And my call to action is to continue to push our system to do the difficult work of engaging in the change necessary to be able to focus on our why being our children.
Thank you. My call to action, you know, when we talk about a sense of urgency, my call to action is to myself to never become complacent in the work that I do. You know, there's all types of corruption that we run into on a day-to-day basis. Some of it is really, really obvious, but there's a form of corruption that we never talk about, which is the corruption of being able to, as a public servant, leave at 5 o'clock and then forget your work until the next day. To me, that's corruption because the urgency that some of our families and kids are facing is 24/7.
So my call to action is to continue to do what's best for children. And, you know, that's always been my philosophy since I entered public education over 28 years ago. I am taking a risk in a district that considered themselves doing fine by making changes that could potentially have ramifications toward my position as superintendent, but I'm going to continue to fight for what's right for kids. But the other thing I just want to say before we leave, because I don't know if I'll have an opportunity to say this, to all the parents here, no matter what your background is, I am a first-generation college graduate in my family. Both of my parents and the rest of my family immigrated here. And just to encourage and support learning of your children, I think is important. I think that's the call to action and the message here. As you can see, it makes a huge difference in a child's life when they know that their parents value and support their learning. And I can't put a price tag on that. I don't think I'd ever be here, and I thank my parents every single day for the opportunities they were able to sacrifice by working 2 and 3 jobs to make sure that I can get and my sister can get a quality education. And I'm very grateful because it did open up the doors, as you mentioned, to opportunities that would never have been possible without that love, that support, and that encouragement.
This is complicated work, right? But it's the right work for us to be doing. And so my call to action is that I'm spending a lot of time these days out in the community helping people understand what we really mean by the science of reading. So there are many community-based organizations, many faith-based organizations, many corporations that want to help us. And so in order for them to clearly understand their role in helping us, we need to name it. Everyone can't do an after-school program, right? Because that's usually the go-to. We'll read with a kid after school and that's going to solve the problem. What we need to understand is each of us play a very important role in this. From birth to 5 is huge for us. And that's when the majority of the people in the community have a touch point with the student. And so if we all know what we need to do in ages and stages, 0 to 5, it's going to make a huge difference. We also need to continue to knock on the doors of those universities who continue to not train our teachers properly. You cannot come to K-12 and expect us to do something different if you're not producing teachers who can come into the classroom and teach well. And for our teachers who are in the classroom, we need to continue to provide them with the support and the resources they need to be able to be successful teachers. This is a complicated time in education, and our teachers need to know that we support them. And so that's a very important piece of all of this. And the last thing that I will say is that parents, you are the first teacher. You know what's right for your child, and you need to be advocating for your child every day. Hold us all accountable for what we chose to do. We chose to be educators. I love this field that we're in. I love we have people like this who are willing to, after working a full day. I've taught 2 courses tonight before coming here, but it's the right work to do. And I just want to shout out my friends in the back that have walked through Stamford Public Schools. I just appreciate the fact that we all, regardless of the school district we're in, are here to support your children, and we're we get to where every student is reading in the state of Connecticut and across this country.
Yeah, go ahead.
My call to action, a come full circle. So I walk the same hallways in Tracy School, West Rocks Middle School, and Norwalk High School, which I learned about the exact historical aspects of post-Civil War. So Freedmen's Bureau, the Yankee school mark coming into states in the South, but also 65% of the people who were teaching the newly freed people were African American women. So I know on a university level at Western Connecticut State, we're always seeking to recruit more and more women, specifically African American women and people of color who can come join as teachers of Western Connecticut State. I do teach 3 foundations of reading classes as well as teacher of special ed. So on a university level, it's being heard. In some of our universities, we see more. But on a classroom level, my call to action is just to continue to support our teachers here in Norwalk and, full circle, for me to continue to walk in the hallways that I did and to help out all teachers whenever they need help, regardless of how messy my car gets. The post-it notes are flying. But, when there's a call to action, there really is the need to fly around the district.
I have 2 call to actions. One starts with the children in the room tonight. I see you. Don't forget about the bookmobile. Don't forget to look for several books, please. And then the second call to action is something that I've been really thinking about with my team, which is that literacy is a public health issue. I've been meeting with the folks from the Department of Social Services on Friday to talk about how we implement early literacy work with folks who are Husky. And I think that question could be the next panel. Literacy is a public health issue. We have adults in this country who can't read their prescriptions. We have an issue, right? So I am honored to be on this stage with so many incredible individuals, to be in this room with so many incredible individuals here in the audience. Thank you for having us. Thank you for inspiring this conversation. May it continue. Maybe that is all of our call to action, is to continue the conversation outside of this room. First of all, these folks are on the clock. One is from Dr. Estrella. There's a man who's much smarter than I, John Potter. You may have read some of his books along the way. But he once said that in order to help people change, you must convince them that the status quo is far more dangerous than any unknown future. And I guarantee you that the status quo of children not reading is far more dangerous than a world where they can all read. That's number one. Number two is this time calls for leadership. And each one of you from the spaces that you sit in are leaders. And in times of deep transformation, i.e. post-pandemic, we need 3 types of leaders. We need agitators. Those are the people that shake and flip the tables, right? We need innovators. Those are the folks that give us new things and new ways of thinking about things. And we need orchestrators, the people who can see the resources and get them to move in the right ways so that we get the outcomes that we want. And so that's my call to action for all of you and to the phenomenal leaders on this panel. Will you agitate? Will you orchestrate? Or will you innovate on behalf of children? Thank you very much. This was wonderful. All of it.
Dr. Tracy.